Hi everyone, Anthony Morganti here. Recently, I was asked if I could do a video demonstrating how I would go about processing a high ISO image using only Lightroom. How would I go about handling the noise in an image if I cannot use any third-party plugin? Well, in today's video, I'm going to do that. We're going to be working on this image. As you could see, it was shot with the Nikon D500 at relatively high ISO of 12,800. If I zoom in, you could see that there is a considerable amount of noise on this image. Now, at this point, it's a totally unprocessed RAW file, and if you've watched any of my previous videos where I reduce noise with third-party plugins, I often say that you should send the RAW file to the plugin as early as possible in your workflow, because if you start to add contrast, clarity, texture, and sharpness to an image, you're enhancing the noise, and it's more difficult for the third-party plugin to remove that noise. Well, in this video, we can't use that third-party plugin. We're only using Lightroom, and really it doesn't matter where in your workflow, when you're using Lightroom only, that you choose to reduce noise, because everything over here on the right, all these adjustments work together, meaning if I go to the detail tab right now on this unprocessed RAW file and remove the noise, then I go up to the basic tab and I start to add contrast, texture, clarity. I go to the detail, back to the detail tab and add sharpness. It won't be any better than if I added texture, clarity, and contrast and sharpness, then reduce noise. It really doesn't make any difference when you're working on an image just in Lightroom. So what I like to do when I only can use Lightroom and I cannot use a plugin is I like to adjust the tone of the image. Adjusting the tone allows me to better see the noise, then I'll reduce the noise. And I found that I more effectively remove the noise that way. So what I'll do is I'll go to the basic tab. When I'm talking about tone, I'm talking about these 6 sliders right here. And mainly I'm talking about these 4: highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, because most often I have a properly exposed image, and I rarely need then to move the exposure slider, and I rarely add contrast with the contrast slider, just my personal way of working on an image. So what I'll do is I'll go to highlights first, and I'll look at the image, especially these very bright areas like the bird's feathers up in here, and I try to tease back some detail by making that, oops, I'm moving texture, not highlights. Let's go to highlights. I'll move that down till I get some detail. I could see a little bit of detail coming back. Similarly for shadows, I'll look at the darkest parts of the image that should have some detail in it, and then I'll open up the shadows. I'll move that to the right till I see that detail come back. Now I've effectively made the image flatter at this point. I've removed contrast. Now I want to reintroduce contrast with the whites and black sliders. And what I'll do is I'll hold the Option key on my Mac in, Alt key on a PC, then click on the white slider, and when I do that, the screen turns black. What I'll do is I'll move that to the right till I see some colors coming through. Those colors indicate that I'm clipping those color channels. You can see there's blue, there's green, there's a little red in there. So I'm clipping those color channels. When you're clipping a channel, that means you're making it absolute white. If you print this, no ink would go down in those areas. It would just be white. So we don't want that, usually. At least I don't, as far as the whites is concerned. And I should add, there's no real right or wrong way. It's all personal preference. Personally, I don't like to clip the highlights at all, or the whites. So I'll bring that down till all that color is pretty much gone. Similarly for blacks, I'll hold in that Option key again. It's Alt key on a PC. I'll click on blacks. This time the screen turns white. And I'll move this to the left. And you'll see we got colors coming through. There's some greens, there's blues, and some reds. And personally, I don't mind clipping the shadows. So I will move those till I am clipping that a little bit. Now, if you print that, wherever you're clipping the shadows, just black ink would be put down. Now, I don't mind doing that. I just think it adds tonal depth to my image. And it adds contrast to the image. So now we've added that contrast, reintroduced the contrast with the whites and black slider. And in doing so, we've made the noise a little more prominent. Now, at this point, I'll go to the Detail tab, and you'll notice everything's zeroed out. I like to work these sliders from the bottom up. So I'll zoom in on the image and you can see there's a considerable amount of color noise. Those are those little blue, green, and red dots all over the place. And I found the color noise reduction in Lightroom to be very effective. Meaning I'll just move it to the right. And usually somewhere around 15, all those color dots are not colorful anymore. Look at right around 10. I mean, it looks pretty good. You can move around a little bit. Oh, a little bit of color over in here. So we'll just keep moving it up. Like I said, usually around 15 is good. There's 17. And then what I'll do is I'll just kind of zoom in and around different areas of the image and make sure that the darkest part of the subject and the brightest part of the subject don't have any color noise. And then the darkest part of the background and lightest part of the background, same thing. No color noise. Looks pretty good right at 17. Then I'll go to the Luminance Noise Reduction. And here, again, I'll zoom in and I'll move this to the right. Now, what I do, and this has changed since this new masking has been introduced in Lightroom, is with this global luminance adjustment, I just want to get about halfway there. Meaning I'll just move it just enough till it looks like, you know, it looks pretty good. I could make it a little better. But then again, if I do make it a little better, I'll start losing detail on the subject, and I don't want to do that. So what I'll do is I'll just move it to a point so that the noise on the subject looks good. And in this case, because that background had tons of noise, till that looks decent. You know, it's still there, but it looks okay. And I really didn't sacrifice the sharpness of the subject that much. Because let's face it, the more you move this luminance slider to the right, the more you're starting to blur out the detail. There's at 100 and there is at 0. So you can see at 50, I am starting to lose a little bit of detail, but it isn't that bad. So it's kind of a trade-off. You have to decide how much detail at this point are you willing to lose because you're getting rid of the noise. And to tell you the truth, on this specific image, right around 50 looks okay. Now what I'll do is I'll go to that new masking and I'll further eliminate noise and I'll sharpen the image. Now I want to eliminate noise more from that background. So what I'll do is I'll go to the masking tool, I'll select the subject, and hopefully it will select the subject perfectly, and it did. Now I'm talking about the background. So what I want to do is invert this. Click there so it's on the background now. Now what I'll do is I'll go down to the noise slider, and it doesn't add noise if you move it to the right. It removes noise if you add it to the right. I'm just going to max it right out. I'm going to zoom in real quick. Oops, to zoom in now because I have that open, I have to go to the left panel and click there. Now there it is at 100. There it is at the default 0 position, or around that 0 position. There's at 100. So I further got rid of that noise. Now there is still a little noise here and there, but I think it looks pretty good. So, all right, so we'll just temporarily close that down so I could zoom back out. Now, I do want to add some sharpness to the subject, the bird. So I am going to go and open that again, and I'm going to create a new mask, and I'm going to select the subject. All right, again, I'm going to zoom in right in here. And what I want to do now is I want to go to noise first. There is still a little noise there. I'm going to try to remove that, and then we're going to add some sharpness. But you can see how the sharpness kind of brings the noise back, so it really doesn't matter. So we're just going to try to add some sharpness, add some texture, add some clarity. We'll zoom back out to fit so we can see it. And there's like a before and an after. That looks pretty good. Go back to that mask. Let's see. Let's add a little more clarity and a little more texture. I think that looks pretty good right there. Now, let's face it, using a third-party program is preferable. You'd rather do that because a third-party application to reduce noise will do a more effective job than Lightroom will do. But you still could make an acceptable image. And, you know, zooming in, look at the background, there's really no noise. There is some noise on the bird up in here. And again, that's when I enhanced, you know, the contrast. I added texture, I added sharpness, and I added clarity, and it all kind of enhances that noise. But at normal viewing, you really don't see it. It's not noticeable. Whereas when we were working on the raw file all by itself, or when you saw the original raw file, we could see the noise throughout the entire image. So it is considerably better. Now, what you can do at this point too, if there are specific parts of the image you want sharp, you could get a brush and just brush in sharpening. So if I wanted like the eye real sharp or something like that, I would get a brush and just brush sharpness in that specific image. Similarly, if there is a part of the image where there is a considerable amount of noise still and you want to reduce the noise in that little part of the image, and it's not necessarily the subject or the sky or something like that, then in those instances, get a brush for that as well and use that to reduce the noise in that very specific part of the image. But I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to go to the effects. I'm going to add just a little darker vignette like that, and I'm done. Notice too, I didn't add any vibrance or saturation at all. I found that as I get older, I don't add as much vibrance and saturation anymore. I tend to like, particularly wildlife image, or in this case a zoo image. I like particularly wildlife to look like they look. I don't want them to look any more vibrant than they looked in the wild or at the zoo. I like them to be realistic. So in this case, just adjusting it as I normally would with the tone, that's the highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, it just brought out the colors like I remember when I was there taking this image. So I'm not adding any vibrance or saturation for this specific shot. Now every camera is different, every camera profile is different. So a lot of times, with Nikon D500, it's pretty realistic as you shoot it. There are some cameras I noticed with my Sony A7R4, the color's a little more washed out. So I would have to probably add some vibrance and or saturation if I was using my Sony A7R4. Whereas with my Nikon cameras, they seem to be more vivid, more colorful as far as the unprocessed raw files are concerned. So that's it. That's how I go about doing this. Thank you, everybody who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon.